Hello, everyone. Welcome to Plurilock's Spring 2022 product release demo event. Today, we want to show you 3 or 4 slides and then do a bit of a live demonstration of some of the exciting new features that we've just released for spring of 2022 across our product line. So without further ado, let me share my screen and we will get right into it. So my name is Aron Hsiao. I'm Vice President of Product here at Plurilock. I'm joined today by Paul Baker, who's our Director of Channel Sales. He'll be helping me out tag team style during Q&A at the end if there are any questions from the audience. Little bit about us as a company. Plurilock is a zero trust identity enabler / provider. We specialize in behavioral biometric authentication. What this means in practice is that we leverage tiny movement patterns in the ways that people type and use their mouse. So not the actual words or sentences that they type, not the actual applications that they use, but rather how they move as they provide this input. We apply machine learning to this input metadata, and we use it to generate an evolving biometric identity signature that can be used to authenticate a user. The great thing about our tech, for those who are familiar, you already know this, but the great thing about our technology is that it can be used, it can provide this authentication as people work, since it relies on the data that they generate as they work. We have 2 products, one called Plurilock DEFEND, which is a continuous authentication product. It authenticates all day long during work. And we also have Plurilock Adapt, which is a login authentication product that I'll speak to in just a moment. But for our spring 2022 release, what's new in Defend, our continuous authentication product, is multiple enterprise enhancements that were driven by or requested by our enterprise customers. The highlights for these improvements are shown on your screen right now. The first of these is that we now have identity provider integration for our administrative console. So for organizations who manage administrator accounts and permissions from a centralized directory like Active Directory, those can now be used to log into Defend, and you can hand off those administrative roles to Defend and define permissions around those roles inside Defend for seamless integration with your identity provider. Second major feature released for spring 2022 in Defend is VPN-driven enforcement. So this in effect means that you can now condition data collection and enforcement on users on whether or not they're connected to the corporate network. This turns out to be pretty useful for BYOD and work from home situations where the device in question may not always be used for company work, but may in fact have other people using it, wives, children, husbands, etc. at different times, or may be used sometimes for non-work oriented tasks. This enables organizations to condition the operation of Defend on whether or not that user is actively connected to the corporate network. The third thing that we're excited about is the addition of group policy alerts and enforcement. So now administrators are able to create more granular policies around risk and enforcement in Defend and generate alerts based on these collections of events of concern. These alerts are now stored in a separate table and available on a separate API endpoint. This enables lots of traffic savings if you are importing Defend data into your SIM. It makes it easier to see what's going on and to keep tabs on the things of concern that are happening in your environment across your entire user base, rather than being a little bit distracted by the volume of authentication that's going on. So those are the 3 highlights for our Defend Spring 22 release. We think these additions make Plurilock Defend much more useful for enterprise customers like those that requested these features, and we're really happy to release them to current customers and new customers going forward for spring 2022. For our Adapt login authentication product, which relies on the same core behavioral biometrics technology, we have a new administrative experience. We've redesigned Adapt administration from the ground up to make it more accessible and easier to use. We now have a clear and simple web admin console that's, as I said, entirely new. Makes it simple to review logs, perform device enrollments and device resets for users, the kinds of things that you assume are going to be user-friendly and easy to do for an MFA product. So let's take a brief moment and see what those look like in practice. I'm going to share a different screen where we have some of these things up and running right now. So this is our Defend dashboard. This is the thing that you see when you first log into Plurilock Defend. New for this release in the system management menu is this identity providers area. whereas you can see you can configure centralized identity providers for use with logging into Defend as an administrator. And when we go in and edit that configuration, you can see this one's set up for Active Directory right now through ADFS. But we have all the fields that you'll need to make that connection. And then we have mappings between internal Defend roles and roles that exist inside your centralized directory. Those roles can be defined over here in the system management menu. And as you can see, when I click create role, there are lots of permissions that can be assigned, and then I can give it a name like admins, and I can map that role to a role in my directory to make the management of permissions, entry and exit much more easy and compliant for enterprises. So other things that we've added this time that we just went over, I mentioned VPN enforcement. We have this new checkbox here in the group policy configuration for a group of users to enforce only when the VPN is active. So only when the user is connected to the corporate network does Defend perform its work. If the user is not on the corporate network, then Defend will be idle and wait for them to connect. The other thing that's new is this area in which administrators can instruct Defend to enforce only when a certain number of high-risk events occur over a certain period of time. So traditionally, in Defend, we have lots and lots of authentication data coming through every few seconds for every user throughout the day. And this is useful and informative, but what we've been told by our enterprise clients is that it's too much data, it's too granular, it's too informative. What they would rather be able to do instead is define clusters of events that are of concern and then get alerted to those clusters of events having occurred. So be told that something of concern, as I define it, has happened. Be notified on the SOC with a parsable email containing columnar data about the event, and then be able to go and consume that history of events of concern in a separate view and on a separate API. This is that view. Alerts, as you've defined them as an administrator, now populate here into this list of continuous authentication alerts. For each alert, you can see which user generated the alert, which host they're on, which group they belong to, what the cluster policy was for that group, and what action was taken as a result. As I mentioned, this is now available via API as well. It's a separate endpoint, so that if you didn't want to import the entire universe of identity checks that are ongoing into your SIM and act on them in a very granular way there, instead you can make some of these definitions on the front end in Defend policy configuration on a per group basis, and then you can just ingest those alerts that represent clusters of events that you've defined to be of concern to you. So we find all these changes to Defend exciting. They enable our enterprise customers to do things that they've been asking us for the ability to do. And starting with the spring 2022 release, existing customers and new customers will have these capabilities. The other thing that we wanted to show you today was what the new Adapt experience looks like. This is the new experience for administration of Plurilock Adapt. It is a very easy to use web administration console. As you can see, there is a log of authentication events. For each event, you can see things like the outcome of keystroke biometrics, the outcome of the geolocation check, the outcome of the browser fingerprint check, the outcome of the IP address check, and then what happened, right? What was the decision that was made? In the case of one of the previous checks being failed, you can see that a challenge can be issued, and then you can see the final disposition on that authentication request. Over here in accounts, you can go to individual user accounts and do things like reset notifications and reset their biometric profile. This enables users to re-enroll if they get a new phone, and it enables administrators to take action, needed action in the case where somebody has seen a sudden change to their typing style. For example, if they have sprained their hand and will be typing differently this week, you can reset that profile, re-enroll, and get Adapt operating again without having to do an extended period of relearning or failing. So the new administrative experience in Adapt and a number of new enterprise features in Defend represent things that, again, clients have been asking for, and we're happy to be able to show you now as available and on the market starting now with spring 2022, the season approaching us. So let me go back to the in progress slide deck and say, are there any questions? Paul and I are here to answer any questions that you might have. We're happy to take questions about the features themselves, about ways they might be used, or about anything else related to Plurilock products or our roadmap going forward. So thank you, and the floor is open for questions.
Thanks, Aaron. So there was a few came in while you were presenting. So why don't we just go ahead and fire them at you, and you can answer accordingly. So one here, does Defend support a mix of local accounts and AD accounts for administrators?
Hi, Paul. Yes, it does. So with our identity provider integration, those accounts that are located on the identity provider will enter its login workflow. Accounts that are local accounts to the Defend administrative console will be handled by Defend. So both are supported, and you can have a mix.
Perfect, thanks. So next one here, you said something about the alerts feature reducing API traffic. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yes. So Defend, as our marketing materials say, Defend does authenticate every user every few seconds. So this can be as frequently as every 3 to 5 seconds all day long as they work. That's a lot of check data, right? On the one hand, it's very good because it means that users are constantly being authenticated. Their identity is being confirmed all day long. At the same time, old habits around importing all of the authentication events from a system into a SIM play a little bit differently with Defend, because that's a lot of authentication events to import, and most of them are going to be normal most of the time. So identity is going to be confirmed most of the time, because most of your users most of the time are happily doing their work in appropriate ways, and they're the appropriate user, which means that there's an awful lot of traffic saying, yes, we confirm that this is the right user. So we've been asked by enterprise clients to provide an alternative endpoint that's cleaner and that focuses on authentication events that failed. And that's, in a sense, what the alerts API does. So we now offer administrators the ability to define clusters of authentication of events that are of concern, and then those go into a separate table that's available on a different API endpoint that really just expresses those things that they want to look at. So it represents a large reduction in traffic. Both API endpoints are still available. So if you want all of the authentication events, you can access, filter, and paginate those. But at the same time, if you just want to focus on the alerts that you've defined and import those, you can do that. And that typically is a several orders of magnitude reduction in the amount of alert logging or the amount of authentication logging that you're going to be importing into other systems. So for those organizations who are cost conscious around the amount of data flowing into their SIM or similar concerns, this new endpoint represents a great way to get really at the crux of what's going on with respect to security alerting and enforcement, and avoid having to ingest all of the moments during the day during which Defend said everything was normal.
Great stuff. So really helping to cut down that SIM overload problem.
Yes.
Awesome. All righty. Another great question here. What's the difference between Defend and Adapt?
The
classic.
The classic. So the products are really complementary with respect to one another. The difference is that Adapt is designed to sit in login workflows in the cloud. So those moments when users enter their username and password, Adapt can act as an MFA solution to enable those users to confirm their identity in using another factor in addition to username and password. Once the login flow is complete, as everyone knows, then you enter the application, you're doing work, and MFA doesn't really come into the picture any longer. So Adapt's work is done, but that's where Defend comes in. So one of the big missing gaps in the Zero Trust universe and in the identity universe is a way to confirm the identity of users after that login workflow, right? Typically when a login happens, a token is issued and that user is then considered to be logged in for some period of time. which means that all of the other systems in the environment are trusting that that token is still good for hours to days afterward. MFA is good as far as it goes, but obviously it would be nice to have some kind of identity confirmation in session, and that's exactly what Defend provides. Defend does a similar thing to what Adapt does technologically, which is to say that it biometrically checks the user's identity and confirms it based on the way that they are interacting with their keyboard, and in the case of Defend, also the way that they're interacting with their mouse. But Defend does this while the user is working. So it's an agent that runs in Windows or Mac OS, which means that it's active through keyboard and mouse input, regardless of the application the user is using. And it operates all day long during the workday, right, as they work, so that at any time during the workday, Defend can be queried with the question, is this still the right user? And the answer can be given, right? Yes or no. And then you can tie enforcements to that so that Defend automatically takes enforcement actions if the user's identity goes bad during one of these checks. And so the two products really work together. Adapt is like that gate or that lock on the door at login time. And then once login is done, Defend can operate on workstations across the organization all day long, providing continuous identity confirmation using the same core biometric technology for the duration of work. So they really go together, and they serve two halves of the same security puzzle, which is how can we confirm that we have the right user using our resources, using our computing environment in a way that enables us to say that we don't have to ever trust anyone, right? That we really are zero trust. We're not trusting a token. We're not trusting a password. Rather, we have biometrics going on all day long, both at login and as work happens.
Nice, thanks. So what's just come in here, does the new Defend improvements tax computer CPU to use more power or resources?
No, happily, the collection of the input metadata that we use for biometric authentication remains the same as it ever has been. So the things that are happening on the actual workstation in the agent that's running on the employee's computer hasn't changed at all with this release. All the additional work is being done server-side in our cloud services. And so there's no additional resource tax associated with this release. Instead, just a lot of new functionality with the same very lightweight Defend agents that everyone already knows and loves.
Nice, new features, no overhead. Awesome. So Laura asks, can companies only purchase Defend or only purchase Adapt?
Paul, I'll let you tackle this one.
I can absolutely answer that. Yes, totally. So you can combine the two products, or you can purchase them separately. We also have a CASB solution that we didn't touch on today, which you can also get from us. So let's have a look. Any more questions here? So for the corporate network option, what VPN platforms are supported?
So we've designed the VPN detection to be platform agnostic. Now, obviously, we haven't tested it with every VPN solution in the universe, but we have tested it with several, and it behaves in the way that we expect with a number of the leading products in the industry. So our support for VPN detection should be compatible with just about every VPN solution that is in common use in enterprise environments.
Nice, and I've got one more here, pivoting back to Adapt. In the Adapt console, can you speak to what keyboard, geolocation, browser, and IP address mean? So I'm assuming that's in the context of authenticating.
Authenticating users at login, right? So so those columns that you saw in the demo were keyboard, geolocation, browser, and IP address. Those are 4 checks that Adapt is performing every time it's used at that MFA step during login. The keyboard check refers to the core technology that both Adapt and Defend use, which is input metadata as behavioral biometrics. So keyboard represents the biometric check. Is this user typing like themselves? Geolocation is actually a little bit complicated, but I'll try to explain it. So rather than keying into one location where the user is expected to be, which is is fine as far as it goes, but these days we have mobile workforces, so that's not enough. The geolocation check actually checks to see if it's possible for the user to be where they say they are vis-a-vis their previous login. So it's checking for impossible travel. So in a sense, if you have a user logging in on the North American continent and then an hour later they're logging in from Europe, this is obviously not a journey that this user could have made. It indicates either that somebody else is trying to use these credentials or that there's credential sharing going on, which is also bad. And so the geolocation check will fail based on that kind of impossible travel, right? This user could not physically be in this place if they're the right user. The browser check is very simple browser fingerprinting of the kind that many applications do in the security world. So it's just a fingerprint of this user's expected browser environment. If there's a mismatch between their environment and what's expected to be, then that check is going to fail. And then the IP address check is essentially just checking to make sure that this is an IP address from which this user is expected to log in. And if it's not, the user will fail that check. So there are 4 checks that encompass both behavior and behavioral biometrics, but also some key facts about the physical world and the user's world contextually that all serve to enable that user to be authenticated as this is really them. They're behaving in the way that we expect them to behave. They're in the place where we expect them to behave and they're using the system that we expect them to be using.
Cool, thanks. We've got questions coming in thick and fast now. So here's a great one. Does Defend biometrics integrate into Adapt and vice versa? Would a profile from Defend on an endpoint catch malicious actions on an Adapt endpoint if not using an endpoint with Defend? Example, user using GCP on a non-Defend endpoint.
So let me see the best way to tackle that question. I think the simplest answer to that right now is they can, but the way that they're typically deployed, they don't. So all kinds of integrations are possible in the real world. But what turns out to be true is that usually when people are entering login information, it's a little bit different from the kind of entry that they're doing as they work. And so while the core technology is the same, the way that we analyze that input metadata has to be slightly different. That is to say that there's a much smaller data set to work from as somebody's entering login data, because it's 30 characters, maybe 50 characters if you're super lucky and super secure, between a login and a password. And so the check has to be more stringent in a way because you're getting a much smaller data set, right? And so it turns out that one of the happy coincidences is that when people log in with the same username and password over and over again during period between password resets, they tend to do that the same way each time because it's kind of a rote behavior, right? They've entered this many times before. And so Adapt really looks back and performs a much more stringent check that looks just at the specific input set that this user makes every time they log in. That is to say, this specific username, this specific password, are they typing the way that they usually do? On the other hand, Defend has to be a little looser, but also to know more, because users, as they work, are going to be entering all kinds of things, right? They're going to write emails, they're going to be typing in Word documents, working in Excel, writing code, and the number of possible inputs is essentially infinite, especially as you add mass activity to that across a number of applications. So Defend actually learns on a much larger data set and makes decisions in a somewhat different way. So for the most part, sharing profiles between the two is not something that's usually going to produce the desired results. But again, both are API driven. So it is possible to query Defend or Adapt about the decisions that Defend or Adapt have made and use that information to inform decision making in your environment or actions taken in your environment that encompasses decisions made by both. Hopefully that made sense as an answer. A little in the weeds, but I think we can get there.
Cool. Yeah, it made sense to me. Hopefully it made sense to the person asking the question as well. So I've got one more here. What type of enterprise would benefit more with this new Defend release?
Well, we're talking all of the kinds of enterprises that we serve already. And as I mentioned, these are really customer-driven changes. So highly regulated enterprises that have employees working on workstations doing work fairly consistently, financial services, government, education, healthcare, et cetera. Really, these are the kinds of capabilities that our clients have told us they need at the very least in their environments. And so we're talking, a lot of these are designed to address concerns around high volumes of authentication traffic. So when you have tens of thousands of users and they're each generating authentication events, it becomes very helpful to be able to apply some more logic around that and also retrieve a table or a set of decisions in a much more targeted way. Similar benefits accrue for corporate network detection. So, for organizations that have employees in the field working from home and so on, that are going to be using a device sometimes for their work and sometimes for not work, and may have other people in the household sharing that device. But there is a corporate VPN and employees are expected and need to be on it in order to do their work. This enables the organization to say, listen, we only need to do this kind of authentication when the person's actually working. We know that everybody who's doing their job when they're on the job is going to be on the corporate VPN. So let's only do the authentication when they're on the corporate VPN. So if those kinds of descriptions match the kind of enterprise that you are or that you represent, this release is going to benefit you.
Great, thanks. And I think we've got time for one more question here. Adapt and Defend collect a lot of data. How would you address fear of employees' personal data being collected? In other words, what if employees don't want to use it because it's collecting so much data?
Well, the great thing about Adapt and Defend is that it doesn't actually collect the data. So I've been using the phrase input metadata here, and that's conscious and it's accurate, because what we actually collect is metadata around input, not the input itself. So Defend doesn't work and Adapt doesn't work by checking the actual words typed or the actual phrases typed. Rather, what's being collected is the timing data around that typing. So how long were keys pressed? How long did it take a user to move from one key to another, right? What was the delay between keys? And then tying those kinds of timing data into sequences. Similar kind of thing with the mouse data, right? We're not looking at what was clicked on or what was dragged, right? In sort of conceptual terms, right? We're not logging, oh, they clicked on this icon, oh, they clicked on that URL. None of that is collected and none of that is stored. Rather, we're looking at the metadata around the mouse input. So the trajectory of arcs, things like mouse acceleration and deceleration, these are the things that are actually biometric, and it's no accident that we call our technology a biometric technology, because it is. And things like knowing what words somebody types or what URLs they've clicked on actually aren't biometric and aren't beneficial from a biometric perspective. So what we capture and store is really the timing data around keystrokes, the movement data around a mouse, not what words actually emerged or what things were clicked on. And it's that kind of metadata that we can use to say, okay, based on the way that this person's hands move, which implicates skeletal structure, musculature, all of those kinds of things, based on the way this person's hands move, are they them or not? So we're really not capturing any of the kinds of data that users are typically concerned about. And we're also not capturing an image, right? So the other concern that we frequently get is, well, this is like a fingerprint, isn't it? And I'm a little scared because if my fingerprint gets out there, that can be used in all kinds of ways to identify as me to all kinds of organizations. But the happy thing about Adapt and Defend and our core technology is also that it's not based on physical morphology directly, right? So it's not an image of your hands or an image of your fingerprint. It's a long list of numbers that are associated with timing, and they vary all the time. You may think back to the way that you type on a keyboard. Even if you type the word hello 10 times in a row, each time it's going to be slightly different when it comes down to millisecond timing. This is where the modern age and the fact that we're living in 2022 and we have machine learning computationally available to us helps. These numbers that vary over time and they're variable for each person, big picture, when you feed them into a machine learning engine, nonetheless create overall a portrait of how this person typically behaves. So even if the numeric timing data gets out there into the universe, It's not definitive. It's not physically descriptive. It's not the kind of thing that's going to be able to be reused to identify you to other organizations, but it is the kind of thing that you can feed into a machine learning engine who can tell you, yeah, this actually behaves like that person behaves, big picture, and turns out to be fairly accurate when you use it with machine learning in this way. In fact, biometrically accurate. So that's a concern that we often hear. I think it carries all the baggage of the term biometric with it, but in fact, we don't cause any of the same concerns operationally that traditional biometrics do, because we're not collecting that kind of data. And it is a biometric platform where we're absolutely not concerned with analysis of words or concordances or link clicks or any of that kind of stuff that other behavioral platforms often are associated with. We are truly behavioral biometric, right? So we look at the biometrics of behavior, not the content of behavior. Hopefully that wasn't too redundant and provided a good answer.
I'd say that was pretty in depth. Alrighty, so I think we're good on time now. Just I can't make Zoom go away. All right, so Aron, thank you very much for presenting about the new Spring 22 release. Some really exciting capabilities in there. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. I hope you found the session useful, informative, and thank you for your great questions. And with that, we'll bid you a good day.